The Usos just had the most explosive backstage confrontation in recent WWE history, and what went down behind those curtains has everyone in the wrestling world absolutely shocked, because this wasn't just a simple argument between the brothers, this was a complete breakdown of one of the most dominant tag teams in WWE history, with punches thrown, furniture destroyed, and both Jimmy and Uso saying things to each other that you can never take back. And if you think you know what caused this nuclear meltdown between the twin brothers who have been inseparable their entire lives, trust me, you have no idea how deep this goes. Stay with me until the very end of this video, because the real reason behind this confrontation is going to blow your mind. And before we get into the absolute chaos that unfolded backstage, if you want to stay updated on every piece of wrestling drama, every backstage fight, and every moment that WWE tries to keep hidden from the public, you need to smash that subscribe button right now, hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and drop a comment telling me which USO you think was in the right here, because I guarantee this comments section is about to become a battlefield. Let me paint the picture for you, because what happened on this particular Monday Night Raw wasn't some random explosion of tempers. This has been building for months, and the warning signs were there for anyone paying attention to the subtle tensions that have been growing between Jimmy and Uso ever since their storyline with Roman Reigns concluded. The Usos, for those who somehow don't know, are not just one of the greatest tag teams in WWE history, they are the greatest tag team in modern wrestling, with multiple tag team championship reigns, classic matches that will be remembered forever, and a brotherhood both on screen and off screen that seemed absolutely unbreakable. Jimmy and Uso grew up together, trained together, debuted together, and conquered the wrestling world together as a unified force that nobody could stop when they were clicking on all cylinders. But something changed after WrestleMania, something shifted in the dynamic between these two brothers, and people backstage started noticing that Jimmy and G weren't vibing the way they used to. There were small things at first, like Jimmy leaving the arena earlier than G after shows, or G doing interviews without Jimmy present, or the two of them arriving in separate cars when they used to always travel together. Wrestling fans online started speculating that maybe the brothers needed some time apart to refresh their characters, maybe WWE was planning to split them up for singles runs, or maybe there was legitimate tension brewing beneath the surface that would eventually explode into something bigger. Well, that explosion happened last Monday night, and according to multiple sources who were present in the backstage area, what went down between the Usos was so intense, so emotional, and so physical that WWE officials had to separate them and keep them in different parts of the building for the rest of the night. If you're already hooked and you want to see where this goes, hit that like button right now and let me know you're invested in this story. The confrontation reportedly started in the catering area, which is always a dangerous place for backstage drama because there are dozens of wrestlers, producers, and crew members around who can witness everything that happens. According to eyewitnesses, Jimmy Uso was sitting at a table with several other wrestlers, and G walked in, saw his brother, and immediately the tension in the room became palpable. People who were there said you could feel the energy shift, conversations got quieter, and everyone started watching to see what would happen next. G apparently walked up to Jimmy's table and said something that nobody else could hear, but whatever it was, it made Jimmy stand up immediately with an aggressive posture. The two brothers started talking in intense, hushed voices at first, but within seconds the conversation escalated to the point where both of them were raising their voices and other wrestlers started backing away from the table to give them space. Here's where the story gets really crazy, because according to sources close to the situation, the argument wasn't about wrestling creative or storyline directions or anything related to their professional WWE careers. This was personal, this was about family issues, about respect, about decisions that were made outside of the wrestling business that created a rift between these two brothers who have been each other's best friends and closest allies for their entire lives. One source described it as watching two brothers who had been holding in frustration and resentment for months finally letting everything explode at once, and it was uncomfortable for everyone around them because this clearly wasn't worked, this wasn't part of some elaborate WWE storyline, this was real emotion and real anger that had been bottling up and finally burst. Jimmy apparently told G that he was tired of being blamed for everything, tired of being treated like the brother who always messes up, and tired of G acting like he was better than Jimmy just because of how their individual storylines had played out recently. G, according to witnesses, fired back by saying that Jimmy's decisions have consequences not just for him but for their entire family, and that Jimmy needed to take responsibility for his actions instead of playing the victim whenever things got difficult. The specific details of what they were arguing about are still somewhat unclear, but multiple sources have indicated that this involves personal family matters, possibly including issues with their father Rikishi, their cousin Roman Reigns, and decisions about how the family legacy should be represented in WWE. Drop a comment right now if you think family should always come before business. The argument continued to escalate, with both brothers getting more animated and more aggressive in their body language, and at some point during the confrontation, Jimmy apparently shoved G, which caused G to shove Jimmy back even harder. This is where other wrestlers had to intervene, because once it got physical, there was a real risk of this turning into an actual fight between two trained athletes who know how to hurt people. Several wrestlers, including some main event level talent whose names I'm protecting because they asked not to be identified, jumped in to separate Jimmy and G before punches could be thrown. But separating them physically didn't stop the verbal assault, because even as other wrestlers were holding them back, Jimmy and G were still yelling at each other, saying things that cannot be unsaid. Jimmy allegedly told G that he was done, that he didn't need his brother anymore, and that maybe it was time for them to go their separate ways both professionally and personally. G reportedly responded by saying that Jimmy had already been going his own way for months, making selfish decisions without considering how they affected anyone else, and that the family was tired of cleaning up Jimmy's messes. The intensity of the exchange had everyone in the catering area shocked, because the Usos have always presented such a united front, and seeing them tear into each other like this was jarring for wrestlers who have known them for years. After the initial confrontation was broken up, both Jimmy and G were taken to different areas of the backstage by producers and WWE officials who wanted to make sure the situation didn't escalate further. But according to sources, the drama wasn't over, because about 30 minutes later, Jimmy apparently went looking for G, found him in one of the locker room areas, and the confrontation started all over again. This time the argument got even more heated because there were fewer people around to intervene immediately, and the two brothers reportedly got in each other's faces again, with Jimmy challenging G to actually do something if he had so much to say, and G responding by telling Jimmy that he's not afraid of him and he's tired of walking on eggshells around Jimmy's ego. Share this video with every wrestling fan who needs to know what's really happening with the Usos. This second confrontation apparently did get physical, with reports indicating that Jimmy threw a punch that may or may not have connected. G responded by tackling Jimmy into some equipment cases, and the two of them had to be pulled apart by security and several other wrestlers who heard the commotion and rushed over to break it up. One source described it as a full-on brawl that lasted maybe 15 to 20 seconds before enough people arrived to separate them, but in those 15 to 20 seconds, real damage could have been done both physically and to their relationship as brothers. WWE officials were reportedly furious about this second confrontation, because at that point it became clear that this wasn't something that was going to resolve itself quickly and that keeping Jimmy and G in the same building was creating a volatile situation that could explode again at any moment. The decision was made to send Jimmy home early, with his segment for that night being rewritten to explain his absence, while G stayed for the rest of the show. This decision apparently made Jimmy even more angry, because from his perspective, he was being punished and sent home like a child while G got to stay, which he interpreted as WWE taking G's side in the situation. The locker room reaction to all of this has been mixed, with different wrestlers taking different sides based on their relationships with Jimmy and G and their understanding of what's really going on behind the scenes. Some wrestlers are firmly on Jimmy's side, arguing that G has been acting superior and judgmental ever since his singles run with Roman Reigns elevated his profile, and that G needs to remember that Jimmy was right there beside him for every success they achieved as a tag team. These wrestlers feel like G's ego has grown too large and he's forgotten that the Usos' success was built on brotherhood and equality, not on one brother being better than the other. Other wrestlers are firmly on G's side, arguing that Jimmy has been making questionable decisions in his personal life that reflect badly on the family and the Anoa'i legacy, and that G has every right to be frustrated with having to constantly defend or explain his brother's actions. These wrestlers point out that being part of the legendary Anoa'i wrestling family comes with responsibilities, and that Jimmy hasn't been living up to those responsibilities the way G has. They see G as the more mature, more responsible brother who has been carrying extra weight because of Jimmy's behavior. Comment whose side you're on and why. I want to hear your perspective. Then there's a third group of wrestlers who think both brothers are wrong and need to figure out how to communicate like adults instead of letting their issues explode in public settings where it affects everyone around them. These wrestlers are frustrated because backstage drama creates a toxic environment that makes everyone's job harder, and they wish Jimmy and G would handle their family business privately instead of turning WWE's backstage area into a battleground for their personal conflicts. The role of Roman Reigns in all of this cannot be ignored, because Roman is not just their cousin and their former faction leader, he's also the head of the table and the person who many in the family look to for guidance and leadership. There are conflicting reports about whether Roman has gotten involved in trying to mediate between Jimmy and G, with some sources saying Roman has tried to stay out of it because he doesn't want to be seen as taking sides between his cousins, while other sources claim Roman has been working behind the scenes to try to get Jimmy and G to reconcile before this situation damages their careers and their family relationships permanently. What makes this situation so complicated is that the Usos' success has always been built on their authentic brotherhood, on the real bond between Jimmy and G that translated into incredible chemistry in the ring and compelling storytelling on television. If that brotherhood is genuinely fractured, if there's real animosity between them that can't be repaired, it fundamentally changes what the Usos represent and raises serious questions about their future as a tag team. Can they continue to work together professionally if they have unresolved personal issues? Can they deliver the same quality performances if there's legitimate tension between them? Can WWE continue to book them as a dominant force if everyone knows they can barely stand to be in the same room together? WWE's creative team is now in a very difficult position, because they had plans for the Usos that may need to be completely rewritten depending on whether Jimmy and G can work through their issues or whether this confrontation represents the beginning of the end for one of the greatest tag teams in wrestling history. There were reportedly discussions about having the Usos challenge for the tag team championships again in the near future, but those plans are now on hold until WWE can determine whether Jimmy and G are willing and able to work together professionally despite their personal problems. Smash that like button if you think the Usos need to work through their problems. Some people within WWE are actually advocating for turning this real-life tension into a work storyline, arguing that the best wrestling angles are always based on real emotions and real conflicts. The idea would be to have Jimmy and G's issues play out on television, building to a match between the brothers where they can settle their differences in the ring and then either reunite stronger than ever or officially go their separate ways as singles competitors. The advantage of this approach is that it takes a negative situation and turns it into compelling content that fans would be invested in because the emotions are authentic. The downside of turning real heat into a worked angle is that when genuine animosity exists, it's much harder to control the narrative and ensure that things don't go too far. There's always the risk that one brother says something in a promo that cuts too deep, or that a match gets too stiff because they're actually trying to hurt each other rather than working cooperatively to tell a story. Wrestling history is full of examples where real-life conflicts were turned into storylines that either created magic or created disasters, and there's no way to know in advance which outcome you're going to get. The personal issues that are reportedly at the heart of this confrontation make the situation even more sensitive, because if this is about family matters that go beyond wrestling, then exploiting those issues for television content could cause permanent damage to Jimmy and G's relationship and to their family dynamics. The Anoa'i family is legendary in wrestling, with multiple generations of performers who have shaped the industry, and that legacy comes with expectations about how family members conduct themselves and represent the family name. If Jimmy and G's conflict is rooted in disagreements about family obligations, about honoring their father's legacy, or about the responsibilities that come with being part of such a famous wrestling family, then those are deeply personal issues that maybe shouldn't be turned into entertainment for fans. The timing of this confrontation is also significant because it comes at a moment when tag team wrestling in WWE has been experiencing a resurgence, with multiple talented teams creating excitement and pushing the division forward. The Usos have been central to that resurgence, and their absence or their dysfunction would create a significant void in the tag team landscape. WWE has invested years in building the Usos as the standard bearers for tag team excellence, and losing that stability would force creative to scramble to find new teams that can carry that division with the same level of credibility and star power. Share this with everyone who loves tag team wrestling. What's fascinating about this situation is how it mirrors conflicts that happen in families everywhere, not just in wrestling families. Brothers who have been close their entire lives often reach points where they clash over values, over decisions, over paths forward, and those conflicts can either strengthen their bond if handled well or create permanent rifts if handled poorly. Jimmy and G are dealing with all the normal challenges of brotherhood, but they're doing it under the intense scrutiny of the wrestling industry and the public eye, which adds layers of pressure and complication that most siblings never have to navigate. The financial implications of this conflict also cannot be ignored, because the Usos as a team are significantly more valuable than Jimmy and G as individual performers. Their merchandise sales, their drawing power for live events, their ability to anchor tag team divisions, all of that is tied to them being a cohesive unit. If they split up acrimoniously, both brothers lose value, and that has consequences not just for their WWE careers but for their ability to provide for their families and secure their financial futures. Wrestling careers are short and unpredictable, and smart performers understand that maximizing earning potential while you're hot is crucial for long-term security. There's also the question of what this means for the broader Bloodline storyline and the Anoa'i family's representation in WWE. The Bloodline has been one of the most successful and longest-running storylines in recent WWE history, creating multiple stars and generating consistent interest from fans. The Usos were crucial to that storyline's success, and their dysfunction creates complications for how WWE continues to tell stories involving the Anoa'i family members. Does Roman Reigns address this conflict on television? Do other family members get involved? Does this become part of a larger narrative about family loyalty and what happens when personal issues threaten professional success? Comment if you think this will lead to a tag team split. The wrestlers who broke up the fight between Jimmy and G have been talking to other people backstage, and their accounts of what happened provide some interesting insights into the psychology of both brothers during this confrontation. According to these witnesses, Jimmy seemed angry but also hurt, like he was lashing out because he felt attacked and misunderstood rather than because he actually wanted to fight his brother. G, on the other hand, seemed more controlled but also more resolute, like he had made up his mind about something and wasn't going to be talked out of it regardless of what Jimmy said or did. That dynamic, if accurate, suggests that this isn't just a temporary explosion of tempers that will blow over in a few days. This might represent a fundamental shift in how Jimmy and G see each other and their relationship, with G possibly deciding that he needs to establish boundaries and stop enabling behaviors from Jimmy that he finds problematic, while Jimmy feels abandoned and judged by the one person who was supposed to always have his back. These are the kinds of conflicts that require serious communication, possibly even professional mediation, to resolve in a healthy way. WWE has dealt with real-life conflicts between wrestlers before, and they have protocols for handling these situations, but every conflict is unique and requires a customized approach based on the specific people and issues involved. The company's main priorities are ensuring physical safety, preventing further incidents that could create liability issues, and determining whether the wrestlers involved can continue to work together professionally. In cases where wrestlers absolutely cannot coexist, WWE will sometimes move them to different brands or adjust their schedules so they're rarely in the same building at the same time, but that solution is more complicated when you're dealing with a tag team whose entire value proposition is built on working together. The fan reaction to news of this backstage confrontation has been intense, with social media exploding with takes, theories, and debates about what caused the fight and what it means for the Usos' future. Some fans are hoping this is all part of an elaborate work, a storyline that WWE is keeping secret until the right moment to reveal it on television. Other fans believe this is completely real and are genuinely worried about whether the Usos will ever be able to repair their relationship and continue as a team. The speculation has been rampant, with every little detail being analyzed and interpreted through different lenses depending on what people want to believe. Hit that subscribe button if you want updates as this story develops. What's undeniable is that the Usos have been one of the most consistent and reliable acts in WWE for over a decade, delivering quality performances, helping elevate other teams, and representing the company professionally in all settings. They've been locker room leaders, mentors to younger talent, and ambassadors for WWE in media appearances and public events. The idea that all of that could be jeopardized by personal issues that have spiraled out of control is genuinely sad for anyone who appreciates what they've contributed to wrestling. The pressure that comes with being part of the Anoa'i family cannot be understated, because that family name carries enormous weight and enormous expectations in the wrestling industry. Every member of that family is expected to uphold certain standards, to represent the legacy with pride, and to conduct themselves in ways that honor the previous generations who built that reputation. When family members fall short of those expectations, it creates tension not just with other family members but with the broader wrestling community that has deep respect for the Anoa'i legacy. Jimmy and G have both spoken in interviews over the years about the challenges and privileges of growing up in a wrestling family, knowing from an early age that they would likely follow in their fathers' and uncles' footsteps, having doors open because of their last name but also having to prove they deserved those opportunities through their own work and talent. They both expressed pride in their heritage and gratitude for the foundation their family provided, but they've also acknowledged that living up to family expectations can be stressful and that finding their own identity within such a famous family requires balancing respect for tradition with the desire to forge their own path. This confrontation might represent a breaking point in that balancing act, where the pressure of family expectations, combined with personal disagreements and individual ambitions, has created a situation where the brothers are pulling in different directions instead of moving forward together. If Jimmy wants more independence and freedom to make his own choices without being judged by family standards, while G wants to uphold family traditions and maintain the reputation that previous generations worked so hard to build, those are fundamentally incompatible positions that require compromise and communication to resolve. The role of social media in amplifying and complicating this situation is also worth noting, because every detail that leaks out gets dissected and discussed by thousands of fans online, creating a pressure cooker environment where Jimmy and G are dealing not just with their own emotions and their family's reactions but also with public commentary from people who don't know them personally but feel entitled to have opinions about their lives. This public dimension makes it harder to work through issues privately, because there's always the awareness that anything they say or do might become public knowledge and be judged by fans, critics, and the wrestling media. Drop a comment about how you'd handle this situation if you were in their shoes. WWE's Human Resources Department and their talent relations team are definitely involved at this point, because any physical altercation between contracted performers has to be documented and addressed according to company policy and potentially according to legal requirements. There will be official reports filed, statements taken from witnesses, and potentially disciplinary actions depending on WWE's assessment of who was at fault and how serious the incident was. The company has to balance their desire to protect valuable talent with their obligation to maintain a safe working environment and enforce consequences when policies are violated. The question of whether Jimmy and G will face any punishment for this confrontation is complicated by their status as veteran performers with long track records of professionalism. WWE is more likely to handle this through conversations and mediation rather than through fines or suspensions, especially if they determine that this was an isolated incident driven by legitimate personal issues rather than a pattern of problematic behavior. However, if there are additional confrontations or if the situation escalates further, WWE may have no choice but to implement more serious consequences to protect everyone involved. What happens next is genuinely uncertain, because this situation could resolve in multiple different ways depending on whether Jimmy and G are willing to do the difficult emotional work required to repair their relationship. Best case scenario, they have honest conversations about what's bothering them, they work through their disagreements with the help of family members or professional mediators, they find a way to respect each other's perspectives even when they don't fully agree, and they emerge from this crisis with a stronger and more mature brotherhood. That's the outcome everyone who cares about the Usos is hoping for. Worst case scenario, the damage to their relationship is irreparable. The things they said during their confrontations cannot be forgiven or forgotten, and they realize they need to go their separate ways both professionally and personally, at least for a period of time, to heal and grow as individuals without the constant friction of their unresolved conflicts. This outcome would be heartbreaking for fans and would fundamentally change the WWE landscape, but it might ultimately be healthier for both brothers than continuing to work together while harboring resentment and unresolved anger. There's also a middle scenario where they agree to maintain a professional relationship for the sake of their careers and their obligations to WWE, but their personal relationship remains strained or damaged, creating a situation where they're co-workers who happen to be brothers rather than brothers who happen to be co-workers. This scenario allows them to continue as the Usos on television while giving them emotional distance in their private lives, but it would likely affect the authenticity and passion of their performances over time. If this video has given you the full story of what happened between the Usos backstage at Monday Night Raw, if you appreciate getting all the details and context and competing perspectives, then I need you to do 3 things right now. First, absolutely demolish that like button and tell YouTube's algorithm that wrestling drama and backstage stories are what people want to see, so they show this video to more people. Second, drop a comment sharing your thoughts on this situation, tell me whose side you're on, tell me what you think WWE should do next, tell me whether you think the Usos can survive this or whether this is the beginning of the end for one of the greatest tag teams in wrestling history. And third, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications because we're going to be following this story closely, and when new information emerges about what happens next between Jimmy and GUSO, you're going to want to be among the first people to know about it. This has been the complete breakdown of the explosive backstage confrontation between the Usos on Monday Night Raw, a situation that reveals how quickly things can fall apart even between people who have been partners their entire lives, and how personal issues can threaten professional success when they're not addressed in healthy and constructive ways. I'll see you in the next video where we'll continue covering the stories that matter in wrestling, the behind-the-scenes drama that shapes what we see on television, and the human stories of conflict, resolution, and sometimes heartbreak that remind us that wrestlers are real people dealing with real emotions and real challenges. Until then, keep watching wrestling, keep appreciating the sacrifices and struggles these performers go through, and remember that the most interesting stories often happen when cameras aren't rolling and when real life intersects with the scripted world of sports entertainment.